Hi, welcome back to Alpine Garage Sports. I am Chris, and you're in our garage. We're talking about CU football. High altitude does not make poor performing players into super phenoms. It doesn't take bad football teams to turn them into good football teams. What it does do is it takes great football teams with good talent and it makes them super phenoms. And I'm going to tell you how that happens and why it's going to affect our program here at CU. And these guys, which have always been just super studs, are going to see another level of performance that they have never seen before. So here we go. And I want to take a pause here for just a second. Thank you so much to those who have reached out to us and subscribed. This is a brand new channel for us, and we have had so many people subscribe and give us great comments and give us likes. I've met a bunch of you through the comments, and I just very much appreciate you guys. We're having so much fun right now. If this is your first time to the channel, or even if you're back again and you haven't subscribed yet, we're actually old school CU fans, and we're going to bring you a lot of the history of CU. We're going to bring you a lot of the culture of CU, and we're actually going to be at the games, and we're going to be tailgating out there. The most important thing is comment down below. Let me know who you are, where you're from, and what you're about, so that we can get to know each other, and I will start this process. So here we go. We're talking about CU and the advantage that CU has because of the altitude and how it affects the performance of the players that we have here. So about me, I'm from the Mountain West. I'm from New Mexico, Colorado, and I played a lot of sports at altitude. So I played football, I ran track, and I played soccer at altitude, but predominantly I was an alpine sports guy. So I raced for a lot of years, and I also now mountaineer. We do a lot of 14ers. I ski all the time. And back in college, I did a lot of papers on the effects of altitude and performance for athletes, because it's really an important part of what I thought I wanted to do in college at one point. But now I get to regurgitate all that on you guys, and you get to hear it. But the thing that makes this so nice is because we know that high altitude can cause sickness, but it also creates a better training environment. So CU itself, the Folsom Field, is at 5,300 foot elevation. Now, it is the number 5 highest college football field in the NCAA. And the number 1 school is actually Wyoming, who is at the same altitude as my garage. My garage is at 7,200 feet exactly. But Wyoming has had terrible football teams, so it really hasn't done much for it. Now, the number 3 school is the Air Force Academy, which we're right across from. And that's at 6,300 feet, so it's 1,000 feet higher than Boulder. Now, when you get into that range of 53 to 63,000 feet, it creates a benefit to the players that train there, and it creates a detriment to the players that travel there. Here's a good example. So the NFL likes to play games outside of the United States. Or one of those games they like to play is actually in Mexico City. Now, Mexico City is above 7,000 feet. Now, when these teams like the LA Chargers, or back then it was the San Diego Chargers, in 2019 we're going to go to play there, they decided to come to the Air Force Academy and train in the facilities there for a week, because the Air Force Academy is at 6,300 feet. And so for a week, they were able to train in this environment, and they were going to get the physiological benefits of training up here. Teams have been playing this game for a long time. We just play this game every day. And so this is how it breaks down. What is the truth about altitude and performance? So I'm going to go into some technical terms just to kind of show you what the bodies of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders are going through right now, because they just got to Colorado. Shedeur and them have been here for a little while, but a lot of these players just got here just a couple of weeks ago. Classes started around the 15th of January, and they may have come from a low altitude environment, for instance, Mississippi. And now they're coming up here, and within a couple of weeks of coming to Boulder, you see them in their workouts, and their workouts are insane. The up downs and the wind sprints and those kinds of things are very taxing on their bodies at sea level, but they're super taxing on their bodies at altitude. Now, I'm going to box these up into 2 boxes. So these players come in now, they've been here for 2 weeks. They're in a box that's called acute adaptation. Now, there's also the second box, which is chronic adaptation. So in acute adaptation, which is when you first get here, 0 days to 30 days, your body starts to tear itself down. Keep in mind that there isn't necessarily less oxygen at altitude. There's the same amount of oxygen percentage at the top of Everest and down at sea level. It's 21%. What is different at altitude is that the air density is less. So there's less pressure, there's less air density. What is the biggest issue is the partial pressure of oxygen. So basically what that means is that when you're at altitude, your lungs' ability to actually put oxygen into the red blood cells is reduced because of partial pressure. A red blood cell can only hold so much oxygen. If the body can't transform that oxygen and push that oxygen into the blood cell, then each blood cell is carrying less. And if you only have a certain amount of blood cells, then you just have less oxygen in your blood, which is causing hypoxia. As soon as you get here, your body within 24 hours starts getting into a phase where it needs to start developing red blood cells. To do that, your body actually produces a erythropoietin, which is a hormone that comes out of your kidneys, and it actually helps produce or increase production of red blood cells. So that's what you need, is if one individual blood cell can only hold a certain amount of oxygen, in order to carry the same amount of oxygen you would at sea level, you need to have a bunch more red blood cells carrying that oxygen into the muscles. That's what's happening to those athletes right now, is their bodies are starting to adapt and create more red blood cells to go in there. Until your red blood cells start increasing to the point where you're getting that same amount of oxygen, your heart rate has to increase. So automatically your heart is increasing, and it can increase, depending on the person, between 20 and 50% at the same level of performance. So if you're running 120 beats per second in your heart, you require, and your body jumps up 50%, you're at 180 beats. Now what that does is your body is going to produce more oxygen that way. Your body is also going to fatigue that much faster. So that's what happens, is these players are going in and immediately they can perform at about the same level they did, because their heart is racing, their heart is beating faster and getting that blood re-oxygenized in a quicker format. But the problem is it can't keep it up for very long, and they're collapsing a lot faster just from, and I don't want to use the word collapse like they're collapsing, but their bodies are actually getting fatigued a lot faster than they would when they were at sea level. So a lot of them may be thinking, I was, a stud when I was down at Jackson State, or when I was in Florida or wherever, and I had all this stamina, and now my body is giving up early, and that's normal. It's natural for your body to do that. And in this case, as you get closer to that chronic adaptation phase, which is 30 days and longer, your body actually gets to the point where it levelizes itself. Your red blood cells are multiplying. And the biggest factor in this whole thing is you have more red blood cells, but your capillary density goes up. So you have capillaries that run through your muscles. Those capillaries are basically small veins. Now, in order to get more oxygen to the muscle, your capillaries actually produce thickness, and they multiply to the point where the density inside the muscle of those capillaries goes up. Now, that then now is another way that the body is actually taking oxygen, putting it into the muscles a lot faster. Increase of red blood cells, increase of capillary density, and these guys are starting to turn themselves into super freaks, because now they have more red blood cells and a greater density than athletes at sea level. Now, they're already very high-class athletes. So now you're seeing the two things culminate into the super athlete at this point. Now, where the super athlete really starts taking effect, when you live at altitude and then you go down and you play at a lower altitude. At that point, you benefit from increased oxygen because you're at a lower altitude. But you also benefit from increased capillary density and increased red blood cells, which is carrying all that higher rate of oxygen in your body, and your body is getting super oxygenated, which is giving these athletes much more stamina at lower altitudes. That gives us that much more. And that much more may be what we need in order to outlast those teams on their own field. You saw Prime when he first got here, and you could see he was struggling with the altitude. That is no different than anybody else that comes here. You can be a high-class athlete, you can come to a higher altitude, and you can suffer from hypoxia. So hypoxia is just a lack of oxygen in the blood, essentially. But acute mountain sickness starts to kick in when it starts to become a little bit more aggravated. Now, when he went from Boulder, which he had been in for over a month, and he went to Vail, that is 5,300 feet to 9,000 feet. Now, that 9,000 feet is much different. When you cross that 6,000 foot barrier, AMS becomes a much bigger issue. Coach Prime was actually a victim of AMS in Vail. So he had acute mountain sickness. He had to actually have a doctor come to his room.
You late, man? I got something to tell you. I'm trying to swallow these pills right now because I had altitude sickness, son.
Huh?
Yeah, I had to call the doctor over to the hotel, and yeah.
When was this?
When I first got there, the night that I got there.
You can see how this can affect even the highest class athletes that are out there. Here's how the athletes are training to adapt themselves to altitude with their diet. So when Coach Prime got sick, you saw one of the trainers come up and give him beet extract.
What is it?
All right, so this is beetroot powder, okay? So essentially, in simple terms, it's gonna help dilate your blood vessels to allow a better flow of oxygen. So it's gonna help you during your exercise, especially since we're at altitude, okay? So it calls for 1 to 2 scoops. We're gonna put it in grape juice so it's a little bit easier to drink. Do you want 1 scoop or 2 scoops?
We'll try 1 scoop.
Let's try 1 scoop.
let me do 1 scoop for
Okay.
now.
You want to try it too? You want 1 scoop or 2 scoops?
What's best for me?
So it calls for 2 scoops.
So what does it do to your stomach?
To your stomach? It's not really gonna do anything to your stomach. It shouldn't upset it at all.
What am I supposed to do?
I told you I take it.
You can take a sip or you can just shoot it back.
Look at that syrup on the table.
You gonna record your reaction?
It's not bad. No, it's not bad.
What is it gonna do?
Did you stir it? I did stir it. You want to stir it a little bit more?
No, I'm just
that's
saying.
good. He just needs to It's gonna not bad, allow a little bit better flow of oxygen, especially as you're still building up red blood cells. Just wait and drink it fast.
So beet extract or beet juice or any iron supplement, really, there's a lot of iron supplements out there. Actually, what that does is that helps boost the development of red blood cells and kind of kicks that off. And so it's a dietary supplement that a lot of people use at high altitude, or especially athletes, in order to start developing their bodies to get that red blood cell count up. And it's just one extra trick to try to get that body to that chronic adaptiveness state to where they can really start performing and not feeling the effects of altitude. Now, the second thing is water intake. So water intake is huge. And a lot of you probably know this. Yeah, when you go to altitude, you need to drink water. You don't need to drink alcohol. That's true. The reason why you see Coach Prime and his sons and the other players and coaches say, it doesn't feel all that cold in Colorado. This is a cold that's not like cold is in Texas. It's a warm cold. Well, the reason why is because there's less humidity. We run very low humidity, less than 30% most of the time, and it can even be less than 10%. Now, when you get down below that 20%, 10% range, literally the air is pulling moisture out of the ground. It's pulling moisture out of your body, specifically out of your lungs. So you're breathing in that 10%. That 10% is then pulling the moisture out of your lungs, that water, and then you're exhaling it. So every time you breathe, you're getting more and more and more dehydrated at altitude. Now, if you don't replenish that almost immediately, you will go into stages of dehydration. When you go into stages of dehydration, that kicks off AMS. So there's where a lot of that comes from. A lot of people think they're hydrating enough, but they're really not. I mean, we're talking for non-athletes, 4 liters a day. For athletes, you're talking 6 or more liters per day of water. When you're breathing at a high rate, the water that's in your body is literally just pouring out. And so you got to pour it back in again. And that is a big, big factor in preparing for high altitude training. Now, the last one is going to be an odd one. It's carbohydrates. So you say carbohydrates, everybody thinks carbs are bad, but here's the point is your body gets energy from 3 different sources. It gets it from fat, it gets it from protein, and it gets it from carbohydrates. The first thing is carbohydrates take a lot less oxygen to produce into energy than either fat or protein. So that's the reason why a high carbohydrate diet is important. Fat is actually the worst because fat takes the most oxygen to actually turn into energy. So when you're training, you're already losing a lot of energy and you're not bringing in a lot of oxygen at this altitude. Fat exacerbates that. So a high carbohydrate, low fat diet for training in Colorado is really important. Now, protein is super important for building muscle, so that's not affected very much. It does take a lot more oxygen than carbohydrates, but you need protein in order to build muscle. That is likely the diet that they're going to be using at the University of Colorado. And by the way, Coach Prime or anybody on the CU staff or football team, if any of you are watching, which you probably aren't, take a look at these guys right here. You'll find these, and you'll probably even find them in the bookstore if you look hard enough. But they're small cans of oxygen, and they come in little tiny cans. This is a medium can, and then they make the big cans. What they do is this is basically canned oxygen. And this, if you're having a bad day, if you go up and you want to go hang out in Vail for a little bit and then come back down, take one of these with you and take the small one, keep it in your pocket. If you start getting a headache or something like that, put it right over, hit that button a couple of times. You get you a shot of oxygen, and all of a sudden you feel 100 times better. Because you guys are college students, this is a great hangover cure. Coach Prime, you didn't hear me say that. I'm just saying. And to the rest of you that are coming in for games, pick up one of these at the airport. Always keep one of these on you. It will help keep you from feeling ill. So let's talk about VO2 max. So VO2 max is how athletes actually measure the amount of oxygen that's being absorbed into their bodies. So when you go and you see athletes running on a treadmill and they're wearing a mask, likely they're checking their VO2 max rate. So when the athletes get here, they may have a very high VO2 max rate where they were from because they're high-class athletes and they've trained their bodies to absorb oxygen in a very efficient manner, and their blood is actually carrying a very high percentage of oxygen. When they get here, bam, just like that, their VO2 max goes down. So then you go into that acute adaptiveness phase where your body starts creating all this extra red blood cells and capillary density and stuff like that in order to get that VO2 max to get back to where it was before, and then you can train past that. Now you go down to sea level and you're a megastar. Your VO2 max will spike, and now your energy, your stamina, your power is that much better at sea level. So we are building super freaks here. We are building super freaks. They're already great athletes. And at this altitude, they're becoming even better athletes. First, they have to make it through this acute adaptation phase. And so when you're watching these training films, they're not showing a lot, but you can see like on the up downs, they're dying on the up downs right now. Up downs are hard to begin with, but you do it in a low oxygen environment and all of a sudden now it becomes super hard. But you know what? The coaches are going to take that as an excuse because you have to train. All right, so let's end this with talking about how does this actually affect the football game. So here it is. When Colorado's playing at home and they already have great coaching and great athletes, and now these athletes are super freaks because they've been training at altitude, they are not going to get fatigued. They are going to be as strong as they were at low altitude. So this is easy. You guys saw this coming, right? They're going to be executing at their same level, which is high. Where the effect comes in is the opposing team comes in. The opposing team comes in and they play at a high altitude environment. The first thing that's going to happen is their heart rate is going to go up. It's going to go up 20, 30, 50%. Okay. So right now they're having to work harder to do the same thing than our players are. Okay. Now that's going to create fatigue later in the game. So you're going to see a lot of teams, especially high altitude, they're going to be moving their players in and out. They're going to do a lot of subbing, and a lot of their players are going to get a lot more reps than they normally do sitting on the bench because they want to keep their players fresh. So that's going to be in our favor because at that point, we're going to be able to take players that are already oxygen deprived but are cold coming into the game, and that creates an advantage for us. You also have dehydration and headaches. It doesn't matter how well prepared these athletes are to come up to this altitude. They're going to experience dehydration because it doesn't matter how often you say, I'm going to drink a lot of water, I'm going to drink a lot of water, I'm going to drink a lot of water. I'm telling you right now, you can't drink enough water. It's a problem, and people, especially some athletes may have a problem with this. So what that's going to do is that's going to cause dehydration, headaches, things like that in the game. It also causes cramping. So that's where this fatigue in the third and fourth quarter becomes a big deal. And then lastly, it's a mental game. So when players come up here, they hear about the altitude. They hear about the fact that dehydration is an issue. They hear about the fact that their heart rate's going to go up. Their medical staff tells them all of this. They do a lot of things to train. They make high altitude masks that you can put on that actually somewhat replicates running at high altitude. They do work, but they're not perfect. So that's where the mental game comes in, is once they start feeling that fatigue, or they get a little bit of a headache, or they get a little bit of a cramp or something like that, all of a sudden they start thinking, I'm getting altitude sickness. My body is not reacting the way I thought it would at altitude. And now you've beat them mentally up here because they're going to be exerting less because they don't want to get too fatigued. And so there's our benefit as well. What are our benefits when we go and we play somewhere else? And especially if we ever go and play, let's say we go and play in a national championship somewhere, and that national championship is in Florida, or it's in Texas or something like that, California, where we're going to be at a lower level. We're going to be hyper freaks. Our bodies are going to have massive amounts of red blood cells. We're going to have massive amounts of capillary density, and our bodies are going to be producing oxygen at a higher rate, so that we actually have an increased amount of performance, we have an increased amount of strength, and we have an increased amount of endurance. When in a game where you're talking about two very high level athletes, Team A and Colorado, their athletes may be very similar in their build and their structure and their intensity and their physiology, but Colorado has been training at high altitude, so now it has that much more stamina and power and endurance. So that may be just that one edge that's going to take us to get it over the hump. That means if we're behind, we can come back in the fourth quarter and beat them because we have an increased endurance that they don't have. I couldn't be more excited about CU football this year. We're going to be breaking this thing down all season long. Go Buffs, we coming.